So when I look back on the majority of my years of coaching and reflect on the plan that I had for my team's culture each season, I would say every year I had a good plan, like a solid plan. Maybe not a great plan, but a plan that would create the conditions for our team to treat each other well, to work hard and work together. I can proudly say that if you read my book, The Culture System, you absolutely can walk away and put together a great plan for your team's culture. And yet, your plan, like my plan for so many seasons, it will fail. It will fail if you fail to lead yourself. A great plan for your culture is absolutely meaningless if you fail to show up for your team day in and day out in alignment with your mission, vision, and values. Your plan for your culture doesn't mean shit, pardon my language, if when the pressure is on, adversity hits, or the season drags on, and you start to get trapped by the simple stories, your ego, or your desire to be liked, to be in control, or to just be right. A former client of mine who was at a high-level Division I college basketball program, she put it to me really well recently. She said, JP, you consult on culture, you coach performance. Right? She recently got her executive coaching certification, was reflecting on what she learned through that experience, as well as our episodes a few months ago with Tiffany Gaskell of Performance Consultants. Right? This former client of mine, she gets it now. Right? The most important thing we can do as leaders is to lead ourselves well. And that's why I'm so focused at this point in my career on my work with coaches through coaching, right? Coaching their performance. Because year after year, season after season, my plan for my team's culture, it fell apart, right? It fell apart. Why? Because I fell apart. Like, I abandoned my process. I didn't take care of myself. And I would communicate one thing to my team and do something, then to go off and do something completely different. So, folks, today we've got Alex Auerbach back on the podcast, and he's going to discuss his book called Greatness, right? Your personal playbook for the pursuit of excellence. And I know what many coaches are thinking, because some of you have sent me messages asking me this question. JP, would this be a good book for my players this year? My answer is no. No, it wouldn't. Not unless you believe it is a good book for you. If you, the coach, the leader of your team, read the book and take the time to apply to your own life, absolutely, then the book could be great for your team. But do not waste your time doing mental performance work with your team, work to get them to be more resilient and gritty and confident, if you don't do the work yourself. In this episode, Alex is going to talk about ways we as leaders can take care of ourselves, right? Work on ourselves as well to make sure that we're at our best for our team. That's literally the best culture plan that you could have this season. It's work on yourself. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you unlock your leadership potential and create winning team environments. My name is JP Nerbun, and I'm joined today by my incredible co-host, Nate Sanderson. Betsy sat this one out. Each week, we bring you practical tips and strategies to elevate your coaching. For more, explore our online courses and books and resources and articles at tocculture.com and betsybutterick.com. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at tocculture.com for weekly culture building insights.
I'm really curious on what you guys have talked about there. You talked about identifying the 3 to 5 key behaviors that lead to the performance, the results that you want. And what I really heard Nate say was actually some certain beliefs that he kept speaking into his team. Like, hey, was that line around enjoy the moment, right? Enjoy this moment that may never come again. Or, and then there's when we work hard, love each other, and do what we do, good things happen. Like, I see that as a belief. And I think so much of our thinking and our feelings drive our behaviors, which then drive our performance and results. I'm curious from your perspective, Alex, A, do you agree with that? And then B, more so like taking that, how do we know what are the right beliefs that we need to be constantly speaking into our team? What are some other ways to kind of reinforce those beliefs, that thinking that we want within our group, so that it starts to drive our results? Because I think a lot of times we do talk about the behaviors because it's a lot easier to tangibly see that. But I'm so curious on how you identify those thought habits, those beliefs.
So I think on your first question, I would say like yes and no. I agree and I disagree. And what I'd say is like, and Nate can correct me if I'm wrong here, but my hypothesis would be that work hard and love each other were things that were defined or operationalized at some point along the way, right? So work hard probably has something to do with like run back and play good defense, right? Don't leave your team hanging or give full effort, right? Love each other probably has to do with like touch somebody in between plays, which I heard Nate mention. So my sense is like reinforcing those beliefs at that point also guides the player's attention to whatever the key behaviors might be, right? And so I think we're thinking about the same concepts on like slightly different planes, right? And it sounds like Nate's done an incredible job developing like good language around it that really succinctly communicates what the expectation is for a great performance for us as a team. And so, when I think about tactics for coaches, right? Yes, it's reinforcing those beliefs, or it's identifying those behaviors, or doing some combination of the two, right? So Nate could have been out there saying, hey, we've got to get you to work a little harder, right? And my guess is Johnny would know what that meant because they've been talking about it all year long, and it's not just showing up for the first time in the playoffs. But again, I think one of the things that does happen when pressure situations come up, and I've seen it even at the highest levels, is, player makes a mistake and the head coach's response is to scream at the ref, right? And like, again, this is just misguided attention, right? I get wanting the ref to make the right call, but the more that you direct your attention to the referee in that situation, the more your players are going to be paying attention to the referee. Like, it's just, again, human nature and just a reality of the situation. So it's not the most effective behavior or belief to be instilling at that given time, right? The belief you'd be instilling is the referee is the problem, right? The behavior you're saying is we're going to pay attention to the referee. In either case, you're not getting yourself closer to the outcome that you want, right? So that's really, for me, what the core of that is what are the 3 to 5 beliefs, behaviors, thoughts, things that we want to be constantly reinforcing, recognizing that, of course, like thought drives, behavior, emotion drives behavior. Is all a little bit more complicated than that, but by and large, that's a simple way to kind of understand the process, right? And then from what beliefs would I get people to be thinking about? There's a great line of research called Serial Winning Coaches by a couple of famous researchers out of Spain. And what they boiled it down to is really 3 things. It's belief in me, belief in we, and belief in us. And the way that they differentiate these things is me is like self-confidence, right? Believe in we is sort of like the connection with the team, and belief in us is sort of the belief in the whole unit, right? The coach, the people around us, all these things. And that is different, right? Like your teammates need to believe in each other differently than you as the coach need to believe in them. I think, it's not always going to be this perfect parallel. Then there's lots of ways to express that, right? There's no one right or wrong way for those beliefs to kind of manifest. You can come up with, your ways of expressing that, right? So love each other is probably a belief in we kind of statement, right? Which is a little different than, belief in us, like this is our experience together. Let's be in the moment together, right? And so those would be the sort of foundational things I'd be thinking about, right? How do I get each player on their team to feel maximally confident in themselves? How do I get the team to feel maximally confident in itself as a unit, right? And how do I get everyone around here to believe that we have everything we need to be successful? And then what are the best ways for me to frame that or package that in a way that's authentic to us, that represents the group that we have, that we can use to drive ourselves forward?
Yeah, and I think though there's also the struggle is when you're not getting results. How do you have that belief, right? Like when you're not necessarily performing. Nate's, they're number one, they're top ranked. Majority of coaches would not be top ranked, right, in their season. So how do you continue to have the beliefs that then drive those behaviors? And I think a lot of times we throw phrases around like, oh, it's a get to, not a got to, like those types of things. We want that type of mentality, or even just that belief of like we can be state champions, right? We want our players to believe that, so that reinforces the behaviors to drive. If we do these things, that they have that belief. The thinking behind that. I mean, I even look at just this last weekend, I was in a fitness competition called High Rocks. It's really big in
Nice.
Europe. Yeah. So went out and did that. And I look at my previous competition from 4 months ago, did it in Dublin. Then I went and did it in Scotland here this last weekend. And I look where everything fell apart for me. And I still had much improved time and the results were there, but it felt so different. And it was just so much that was down to my thinking. Like I was questioning whether I could get under an hour, and all these types of things were going through my mind. I was just constantly challenging, my thinking was not what I wanted it to be. And thus, things did not go as well as I had hoped. So yeah, I'm just, I think that the big challenge in this is when we're not getting the results we want, how do we keep people believing the things that we want them to believe? That practice is a get to, not a got to. It's that we can be successful if we keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think the key to that, right, is really making sure that your process and whatever your process goals you've identified are, that you do genuinely believe that they will lead to the results that you want, right? It's not a perfect up and to the right, like, we're not making widgets here, right? You don't put in 5 hours of effort and get 5 wins on the season. Like other teams are preparing too, right? Other teams are trying things too. And so there's a little bit of that, like you've got to have real clarity that whatever it is, like let's take you as an example, JP, all the training that you're doing, you've got to believe that the training that you're doing is getting you closer to the high rocks output that you want. And just as a sidebar, I'm flying out to Dublin next time so we could do one together. I really want to do one.
Awesome.
But I think that would be kind of the first thing, right? And then a little bit, you need to like stay the course and be consistent. I think one of the things that happens when you don't get the result that you want is that the tendency is to start looking for everything that isn't working, right? And then you start just changing a bunch of stuff. But oftentimes we don't give things enough time to play out. Like it takes a really long time to build a great culture. It takes a long time to get everyone on a team understanding each other deeply enough to be able to recognize like how each other plays and what they need to be successful. And so if you don't stick with it a little bit, you're going to get more frantic, more chaotic experiences where you really can't figure out what the core of the issue is. So yes, it can be hard to sort of like trust the process, right? But if you believe you've built a good process, then sticking with it is probably the most useful thing that you can do. And that doesn't mean don't experiment with new things or try new lineups or whatever, right? I'm not suggesting, just keep it the same all the time. But what I am suggesting is if you genuinely believe that good hard practice plus good psychological preparation plus connection on the team, for example, if that's your formula for what makes for a great team for you, then you've got to stick with that for a little bit and give it time to play out, even if it's not a perfect one-to-one input output, because otherwise you're never going to know or get to sort of see it fully lived out. And I think gets more into coaching stuff too, probably. But I think one of the things I've observed is as coaches get a little bit more frantic or frenetic about the outcomes that they're getting, it creates the same internal experience in their players, right? So what it ends up doing is sort of undermining the players' belief in you as a coach. I'm not going to name any team names here, but I watched this play out with a team I'd worked with last year. Like the more that the coach's message deviated from what they had said all week after a loss, the more the players started to be like, what are we even doing right now? Like, I don't believe in this. I'm not excited about this. Right. And if the coach would have stayed the course, then it gives the players something to stay grounded in and focused on. And look, after 6 losses in a row or something, if that would have been the situation, like I get it, maybe you do need to change a little bit, but changing after every single loss is probably not going to send any real message of we have conviction in our process. We believe in what we're doing here and we're going to get it right in the way that we need to send that message.
And just to put a bow on this conversation, Alex, you had a tweet this week talking about how to master confidence. And number one was, and I'm paraphrasing here, but document victories large and small, right? And sometimes when we're waiting for the larger outcome victories, we have to be also mindful and pay attention to, like you said, focusing our attention on where are we making progress, even if we're not where we said we want to be. And I think that's a critical component too.
Yeah, you gotta figure out how to celebrate wins, man. Celebrate progress all the way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's transition to the book here, and maybe just to give our coaches a little bit of context. You've obviously had a wealth of experience with multiple sports and working with teams and individuals and all kinds of opportunities over the years here. What was the genesis for trying to put this book together in the first place?
Yeah, there's sort of 2 parts to it, right? The first was a real disenchantment with my own graduate school education. That's no knock to my grad school advisor, who I love dearly, but just to the reality that like a lot of the training to become a sports psychologist is pretty basic and not all that helpful, right? Like, going through 4 years of graduate school and figuring out how to teach someone 5 skills is pretty lackluster as far as an experience goes, right? Oh, if you come out of here and you could teach people how to meditate and do imagery and set goals and use good self-talk and manage their arousal, like, you've got it. It's like, no, that's just not the answer to helping people get better consistently. So part of it was like, I tried to write the book that I wish someone would have given me when I was a grad student, because the only other one I'd seen that was even remotely close was Stephen Kotler's The Art of Impossible, which is also, I've had my book described as rich, right? Rich with information. Some people might call that dense. Stephen Kotler's book, I think, is also dense too, right? There's so many different things, but that is the reality of becoming excellent. Like, it's not easy. If it was, everybody would be doing it and we'd have no such thing as a bell curve. We'd all just be in the top 1%. But the reality is, like, it's not complicated. I'm not asking people to do brain surgery. Like, it's still pretty simple. It's just not as simple as these 5 skills and now you're good to go. And so I was pretty disenchanted with that as a framework and thought, gee, it would be really cool if someone could do something where they pulled together what it really looks like to try to sustain excellence over time and perform at your best, because those are 2 different types of performance. And I talk about that in the book too, this idea of typical versus maximal performance. A lot of the sports psychology books are written about peak performance, right? It's, oh, what do you do when you get to the Olympics? I'm like, that's great. That's useful information. What do you do when you're training for the Olympics is probably a more important question to answer if you want to get a gold medal when you get to the Olympics. But there's not that many books about how you get high quality practice going into an Olympic run. So that was reason 1 for writing the book, and probably the most important reason really that sort of pushed me to put it together. The second was a disenchantment with the popular ways that we think about high performance, right? So this is no knock to any other like practitioners out there. I think everyone finds their own kind of like space or thing that they really believe in. But I think oftentimes we have a tendency to distill excellence into like one thing or 2 things because we think it'll be really easy. And then what you get is a book with 15 chapters all on the same subject in 16 different areas, right? Like, it's grit in school. And like, look, I love grit. I thought it was a great book. I did my dissertation on grit, but like, grit is not the answer to excellence by itself. It's just not. And the same thing is true for mindset. The same thing is true with some of the other peak performance books out there. And so it's like, okay, we need to give people a realistic understanding of what it means to actually be great. And the most concrete example I can give of this to you is that most sports psychology books say absolutely nothing about practice. And it's like, if you're not talking about practice, I have no idea how you can have an honest conversation about being good at something. There's nobody that becomes good at anything without practicing. It does not happen. Surgeons spend years practicing before they cut them loose. Athletes practice every single day before they go out and perform. Lawyers practice law and before they go to trial, right? Like, if you want to be good at something, practice is part of it. And so if you're going to give me, a book that's just full of like, have a great attitude and give good effort and think good thoughts, I think you're lying to people. And so I didn't feel comfortable living in a world with those things being sort of the front way that we thought about peak performance.
And I'm really curious your perspective on this, because you've operated in teams and you also work with those coaches and those leaders. When coaches typically pick up a book around mental performance, the mental skills, they're all, I would say, in my experience, most are looking at this as going, okay, how do I take this book and bring it to my players? Because my players need this. My athletes need this. How much does this actually start with the leader themselves, that they start to really understand and master these things?
I think it definitely helps, right? It helps to walk the walk. It helps to be the person that models what it looks like to be excellent. And one of my hopes when I wrote the book was that coaches would pick it up and think like, oh, I can do this too. There's stuff in here for me as a performer. This is not just for my athletes. So I do think it's really critical that the leader embody a lot of what it is that they hope to see their athletes do. And I also think it's helpful just in general to sort of practice what you preach, right? Like I would never ask an athlete to engage in any exercise experientially with me in a session that I had never done myself. And that's not because I don't believe in the other things that I'd be thinking about, but like, if I haven't had an experience with it, I'm not sure I want to test it on you, like, and I think the same thing is true for you as a coach, right? If you haven't had an experience trying this on, at some point, I guess the easiest way to think about it is like at some point it starts to be inauthentic, right? It starts to not be reflective of what's true for you. And your players pick up on that. Every coach I've ever worked with knows that their players detect when there's even the slightest bit of disconnect between what you say and what you do, right? And again, I see this at all levels where a coach is saying, you know, you got to get good sleep and you got to eat well. And then the players see you up in the meal room and you're smashing, you know, whatever you're smashing, just a bunch of chicken tenders, you know, it's like they're not gonna buy into your message. And the same is true with mindset, right? If you're telling players, hey, manage your stress, take care of your brain, you know, stay focused, and then you're out there and you look like a mess, like your players are going to pick up on that. And there's actually data that supports this. There's data that shows that when athletes perceive their coaches to be more stressed, they're actually less confident in their athlete and question their coach's competence, right? And so developing some of these skills for yourself as a performer, as a coach, is going to help you transmit these same lessons to your players. It's going to help it be more consistent. It's going to reinforce the message in the way that you want. And ultimately, you're going to get better performance.
Yeah, the very first line of the book is elite performance requires complete wellness. You can't perform if you're not well. And that really struck me, but not for two reasons. One is I look at it and I think you talked about like the visualization and all the things you learn and, you know, getting a sports psychology degree. And it's like, yeah, those things are great. But if the human being is coming in here and life is not going well for them, their overall well-being is struggling, whether it's the athlete or the coach, how can, like, I'm not sure how much visualization is going to help them in those moments.
I think that's exactly right. You know, I was talking to an NFL team a couple of weeks ago just about some of the ways that they're thinking about integrating mindset work broadly, mental health, mental performance into their system. And one of the things you realize at the highest level is you really don't see that many unwell people in pro sports because you would just naturally be weeded out. Like you cannot get to that level of excellence. Of course, there are exceptions, right? But you very rarely can get to that level of excellence if you are truly under functioning in your own life. It's just going to show up somewhere, right? Whether it's your relationships with your coaches or your teammates or fatigue or whatever it might be. And so I think of wellness as the foundation for peak performance. You can get through a couple games, you can get through a 5-game road stretch, you know, feeling a little blue, right? Or feeling a little down or being under recovered. You're not going to get through 82 games at the level that you want to get through 82 games at. It's just not going to happen. And so we have to give you the skills to take care of yourself. And they're really, again, there are several of them, but most of them are not complicated. I'm not asking you to, you know, spend 6 hours a day meditating or doing breath work. Like I'm asking you to spend 15 minutes with your friends and maybe writing a journal once in a while, you know, and doing little things like that will go a really long way for you taking care of yourself. And the more you take care of yourself, the better your odds of succeeding are going to be.
Yeah, but I'm curious, like, I want to kind of push back on that because I think a lot of the perception is at the highest levels that the coaches, the leaders, it's just the grind, the lack of sleep. You know, it's just this endless just work, sleep at the office. I mean, these are the stories coaches hear. They don't hear about coaches spending time with friends or journaling, right? So tell us what's going on here. You know, is it more of a misperception? And then, I mean, we do see athletes and we do see breakdowns of coaches or leaders or athletes that, you know, and maybe those become the stories that we'd say, well, that's what athletes are like in the NFL. Like they're all out there and doing these types of things, but I guess what you're saying, maybe that's not the norm. I mean, just help us on that.
I think some of it is mysticism. Some of it is American culture glorifying workaholism. And some of it is conflating the process with the results. So if I look at the best performers in the world that I can think of across sports, Tom Brady has a nutrition company because he believes that he needs to take care of his body. LeBron James invests millions of dollars each year into his rest and recovery. And there have been stories on that. There's been stories about Steph Curry going in a float tank to take care of himself. People talk about Kobe Bryant and his 4 a.m. workouts, and they skip over the fact that Kobe took a bunch of naps, like a bunch of naps. And so, you know, I think we just leave out the part that's not sexy, right? In the story, we leave out the part where it's like, oh yeah, this guy might have needed, you know, sleep. Like if you listen to LeBron and you can look up some of his stuff, he'll say like one of the things he never sacrifices is 8 hours of sleep. It's like a non-negotiable for him to be great at what he does. It's just not that interesting to hear about, right? It's much more interesting to hear about LeBron spending 3.5 hours in the gym and all the drills he did when he was in there for 3.5 hours in the gym. And I think coaches, no offense, coaches, but I think coaches are very, very behind in this area. My hypothesis is that the coaches who take time to invest in their well-being and recovery off the field are going to be much better coaches on Saturday or on game day or Sunday than those who don't. And I've got a few good data points about this. Like when I was a young football coach, I heard Chris Peterson talk once, and Chris Peterson talked about how he would come into the office at 8 a.m. and he would leave at 6 p.m. And it was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe a football coach goes home at 6 p.m. But this dude is like one of the winningest coaches we've seen in college football. It's like, and he did it his own way. And I think it really was about him being realistic, which is like, look, there's only so much film you could watch. Yeah, you might pick up like another tendency or something like that, but it's probably not going to materially change the outcome of the game. I think a lot of what drives that behavior for coaches is fear, right? It's fear that you're going to get fired if you don't win. And so you feel like if I just put all my time and attention into it, they can never say I didn't work hard enough, right? And I can sort of like feel good about myself having done that. And look, that's fine. Like I get that you might need to cope with whatever pressure that you feel. And oftentimes I've heard from coaches this sentiment that like they believe that they're getting paid a lot. And so the way to show that they're getting paid a lot or making up for it is by working all the time. And I think the mindset shift is recognizing that you get paid for the value you create. You don't get paid for the time you spend on task, and if the value you create is winning and you can do winning by working from 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, then you should do winning by working from 8 to 5 or 8 to 6. And then I think you got to look at the data. So the data shows that leaders who invest in their recovery after work have higher performing teams. And this is true for military teams. This is true for surgical teams. This is true for combat teams. This is true for teams at work. So the odds that that's true for football teams or sports teams are also pretty high. Like it's not going to be a zero, a perfect one-to-one correlation, but it's also not going to be zero. So that's data point one. And then one of the most consistent findings that we have about human work is that after about 40 hours of work in a week, your performance starts to suffer. So from hours 40 to 55, you're basically getting like a slightly less marginal return on the time that you're putting in. After 55 hours, the quality of your work materially gets worse for each additional hour that you put in. So you're actually working against yourself, spending all this time like grinding and working it out. The quality of your work that you're doing in hour 56 and beyond is not anywhere close to the quality of work that you're doing in hour 1. And so more is not always better. And again, you can use parallels to like strength training, right? If you go into the gym and you bench every day, eventually you're going to tear a pec. You'll get stronger to a point and eventually you'll tear a pec. The same thing is true as it pertains to mindset, mental health, well-being, grinding it out, right? Like you can do all this stuff. You can grind as hard as you want. Eventually you're going to burn out. And I think the most recent example I can give, and then I'll get off my soapbox, is Sean McVay. When Sean McVay won the Super Bowl, he came out and was like, I don't know if I can do this again. Like I've been working so hard. I'm 34 years old. I don't know if I can get out there and do this again. And I think that's a very legitimate thing to bring up if you've been grinding as hard as he was grinding, right? Yes, he won a Super Bowl. He's not the all-time winningest coach in the NFL though, and there's probably a lesson in there around what it means to work so hard that you feel like you want to quit after a few years of doing the job versus being able to have a track record like a Bill Belichick or a Nick Saban or these guys who do it for 40 plus years. There's probably something that they're doing that allows them to sustain that over time.
Yeah, no, I think I appreciate that soapbox. So thanks for getting up on that. Hopefully Nate was listening. Nate loves to work hard too, but it's trying to maintain that balance of sleep and all that. I'm curious here, like everyone navigates different transitions in their coaching career. You just went through a transition the last time you were on this podcast. You were working for Toronto Raptors. Now you work for yourself. And just when you navigated, maybe you can give the listeners just a quick overview of why you made that decision. But I'm probably more applicable for our listeners is just what are some principles that you applied when making that decision that might help and apply with other coaches that navigate transitions, whether it's moving up the ladder in coaching, moving out of coaching, or whatever it be?
So the reason I left was I had my first child about, 2 weeks before my 4th season. And then about 3.5 months into the season, my wife looked at me and said, I really don't think I could live in a foreign country with no family support while I try to raise your kid while you fly around America on a charter plane. This is probably not going to work for me. And I thought that's a pretty reasonable way of thinking about it. And as much as I don't love hearing that, I understand what it is that you need. And my priority at that time, of course, was to put her in a position to be the best mother that she could be, and for me to be the best dad that I could be. And so the way I navigated that decision was really a couple things in mind. The first was, what is going to be most closely aligned with my values? And for me, being a great partner, being a great father, there was nothing more important to me than that. And so if that is truly what I want to stand on and what I believe, then it's my responsibility to create a situation where I can be the best dad and best partner that I can be. And if that can't be while working in the NBA, like I just can't be around as much as I want, then I should leave the NBA. And mathematically, what it boiled down to is I basically, for every 3 years I worked in the league, I'd miss a legitimate full year of my daughter's life. I was on the road like 120 to 130 days a year. You multiply that by 3, you get 360 to 390. Like you're missing a lot of time for a person who's really only going to live with you for 18 years, and after that, your time with them is going to be significantly less. And so I didn't want to miss 6 of 18 years flying around, as much as I loved the job that I did. The second thing was to think about, how do I do this in a way that most preserves the relationships that I've built? I was incredibly fortunate to work with a really gifted front office, some talented coaches, people who were really invested in each other, in the game. I loved my job. Like, I thought the people I worked with were incredible, really smart, pushed me to be better. There was a lot of value I personally extracted from being in that work. And so once I had sort of made a decision that aligned with my values, it became, how do I navigate it in a way that honors and respects the connections that I've built, which is also a value of mine, right? Is maintaining these good relationships. And so that would be what I would point to, right? Is what are your values, and what do you want to anchor the decision in, right? What's most important to you, and who are you when you're expressing the highest, best version of yourself? And if that is different than the life you're living now, then it's worth exploring and considering what you could change to make your values more aligned with what you do on a day-to-day basis, because I think you're going to enjoy your life more. And then I think the second thing would be to really think about the impact on the people around you. And how you can navigate that space in a way that honors the connection or relationship you have to them. That doesn't mean that you owe the people around you anything. I think that that's a different thing, right? I think, and that's one of the things that often gets conflated, right? As you feel like I struggled with this too, right? Like I had signed a specific deal, like I owe it to them to finish it. But the reality is, like, I don't owe them finishing what I thought I could finish when I thought I could finish it. What I owe them is the truth about what I think is going to be best for me and what's best for the organization. And if I'm not in my best headspace, if I'm not the best performer that I can be, then the team should have the opportunity to replace me with someone who can do better work and who can be the best version of themselves in that role. And I think when I got to that point, it became easy to make that decision.
Well, Alex, we'll get you out of here on this. I find you to be an outstanding follow on social media, and I send a lot of your tweets to my players all throughout the year. I just think you do so much in kind of the free open space that is beneficial for players and coaches alike. What is the best way for our listeners to follow you and find some of your stuff?
Well, first, thank you both for having me and for the opportunity to share a bit with you again. It's always fun to hang out with you too. You can find me on all the social media sites at this point at Alex Auerbach, PhD. My website is alexauerbach.com. The book is called The Greatness. You can order it anywhere books exist on the internet, like Amazon. And please, don't hesitate to reach out. I love building community in these places.
All right, that's it for our episode of the podcast. I love this line, this one big line from Alex. Elite performance requires complete wellness. You can't perform if you're not well. It's such a powerful reminder for us as leaders. Just so you know, we'll have links in the notes to this, of the notes of this podcast, to his book called The Greatness, as well as links to Alex's website where you can subscribe to his newsletter, which is a fantastic read as well. I get a lot of great stuff for myself, and I also share it with other coaches out there. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with other leaders and be sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, if you want to go deeper, if you actually want to train yourself on how to create an extraordinary culture, you might want to consider the TOC Transformational Coach and Culture Certification. For more information and all our online resources and more, go to tocculture.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our weekly newsletter at tocculture.com for episode notes and resources. Thanks again for listening, and